Welcome everyone to the CINA Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm Joe DeZino. I'm an Associate Professor of Forensic Science here at George Mason University, and I'm a member of the CINA Science Committee. CINA is the DHS Center of Excellence for Criminal Investigations and Network Analysis, and it's based at George Mason University. A gentle reminder to please mute your microphones during the talk, and if you're connecting on Zoom. The talk is also being streamed live via YouTube. Please feel free to type your questions in the Zoom chat or YouTube comments at any time. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the talk. And one final note on our Distinguished Speaker Series. Next month, we welcome Aaron Ross from Michigan State University on Thursday, September 22nd. Details, videos of past talks, events, and other information and resources are available at the CINA website, cina.gmu.edu. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Our speaker today is Gervis Grigg, an executive and recognized thought leader with 28 years of public and private sector experience leading complex organizations, investigations, and technical programs. In February 2021, Gurvais retired from the FBI after 23 years of service. While in the FBI, he earned numerous awards, including the FBI's Manuel Gonzalez Ethics Award and the Presidential Rank Award for his sustained executive accomplishments as designated by the President of the United States. Since then, he's joined Chain Analysis as the Global Public Sector Chief Technology Officer. He's responsible for connecting global governments with the cryptocurrency industry and providing them with the best data and tools to manage risks, address threats, and conduct effective investigations. With that, I'll introduce Gervis Grigg. Thank you, Gervis.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was just reflecting, Joe and I had the privilege of having the same job at the FBI, both as directors of the FBI laboratory. What a great privilege that was for the both of us with our love of science. As I walked into the building this morning, I was telling some of the folks here, I had a nostalgic feeling. My undergraduate was in biochemistry, so I spent a lot of time in buildings like this and have a great love for science and learning. So it's a great privilege to be back in a location like this and a chance to share with you some insights about sort of 21st century finance. I wanted to begin, before I get started, and tell you a quick little story. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Willie Sutton. So Willie Sutton is a pretty famous criminal from way back in the day. In fact, he was one of the first people to make it onto the FBI's top 10 list. But what made Willie Sutton famous wasn't the fact that he robbed lots of banks. He was a fairly polite bank robber, but he was still a bank robber. He also was imprisoned a number of times, had some daring escapes from prison. But at one time, he was asked, Willie, why do you rob banks? You know what he said? Because that's where the money is. And criminals continue to follow Willie's advice. They go where the money is. So what I'm going to share with you today is a little bit about where 21st century finance is moving and why criminals, like lots of other legitimate actors, are moving to cryptocurrency and digital assets as a way to both store value and transfer it securely globally. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, you've already heard a little bit about my background and the opportunities I've had. I feel very, very fortunate and lucky to have had so many opportunities during my career, and I really enjoy coming to events like this and getting a chance to talk with others and to learn and to share. So let's take a quick poll. Again, you don't have to raise your hands, but I'd like you to think about this question. So, what do you think was the total value of cryptocurrency that exchanged hands last year in 2021? Was it 1.8 trillion? Was it 5.8 trillion? Was it 10.8 trillion? Or 15.8 trillion? Just how much money exchanged hands in crypto last year? Well, the answer is 15.8 trillion. A lot of money, right? Well, when we look at that over time, the emergence of Bitcoin many years ago and now with a whole series of other coins and offerings, you can see the market cap has grown, and it looks a little hockey stick with a little bit of deviations of late. So in 2019, we saw about $1 trillion exchange hands globally in crypto. In 2020, it went up to 2.8 trillion. And last year, it was 15.8 trillion. So you don't have to have an advanced degree in statistics to realize something's going on here. Now granted, there was some market capitalization, but it also means there are a lot of new players moving in. Hundreds of millions of people around the world are moving into this space. And criminals and grifters follow the money. You can't have trillions of dollars move into a whole new asset class and not attract those individuals seeking to take advantage of their fellow man. Now, for a little bit of context, how much money moves on an average day in the SWIFT network? Well, about $5 to $7 trillion, right? And there's also Fedwire and other forms. So in the larger economy, $15.8 trillion, a big number to be sure, still is a small percentage of the overall amount of money that moves across the globe. However, what will this look like when we're back together, let's say in 5 years? Well, the trend is moving towards that direction. And I want to talk a little bit about how criminals and malign actors are leveraging this new asset class to both take advantage and generate funds for themselves. So here's some important things to understand regarding cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are publicly available and in real time. These currencies are global, meaning if I live in country X, I can purchase that, right? And the technology is constantly changing. We're seeing all kinds of new innovations in this space, which makes it exciting and also challenging to keep up with. Just a few years ago, the term DeFi didn't mean anything, and yet now you'll hear that commonly exchanged. There are yet to be other innovations happen in this space that will profoundly impact how we store value and how we exchange. I just read an article the other day about how the country of Colombia, that has been plagued with wars and strife for many, many years, are exploring how they can move their public records to the blockchain because of its permanence and immutability. Therefore, an individual's ownership of that record is not in dispute. So I think we're going to see profound changes over the next several years in how blockchain technology are being used in everyday life. And cryptocurrencies and digital assets are just some of those. And of course, cryptocurrency are bearer instruments, meaning if you own it, you own it. So, while the blockchain is publicly available information and anyone can access and see it, it's really not human readable. And it's difficult for us as human beings to keep track of a whole slew of alphanumeric sequences and how they're exchanging value, date and time with other alphanumeric sequences. And so there's a need to go through that and make it more understandable. So we at Chainalysis, for example, spend a lot of time mapping the blockchain and looking up these addresses and understanding how they exchange value with one another, what those transactions look like. And in doing that, we then identify the ones that have risk associated with them. Our company operates in about 70 different countries, and we have over 700 customers. And our customers range across the spectrum, as you might imagine. In the government sector with law enforcement, intelligence, defense, and financial regulators, but we also sell to cryptocurrency firms, fintechs, and financial institutions. And our customers use the data and information we collect, as well as our tools and services, to help understand how blockchain transactions are occurring and what implications and risks those may pose either for their customers or for the subjects of their investigations. So here's something sort of interesting to understand, where that the majority of over 2/3 of Bitcoin activity, for example, involves a service. And when I say a service, I mean something like a cryptocurrency exchange, where an individual is using that to buy and sell and broker their transactions. Why that's significant is because at those exchanges, there are anti-money laundering regulations, rules, and procedures to help identify and know their customer and manage those transactions. That's important for government clients, for example, as well as financial institutions to know who they're doing business with. And they can do that counterparty analysis to know who's on the other end of that transaction. These services have thousands, sometimes tens of millions of addresses. And the technology that we deploy and utilize helps understand and demystify those by clustering and aggregating that information. So we also spend time identifying those services and activities that may be associated with risky activities. So we may look and identify, hey, these wallets are transacting with a darknet market vendor, or purchasing child exploitation material, or perhaps associated with some other form of illicit activity. And we can apply those kinds of tags and filters so those that use our data and services are able to better understand the risks associated with those transactions. But let me hasten to add that the vast majority, of course, of cryptocurrency usage is for lawful and legitimate usage. But as we mentioned, you can't have trillions of dollars move into a whole new asset class and not attract the criminals and the grifters. And it's important for the integrity of the system to identify those and help the system to police itself and clean that up. So some of the things we pay attention to are things such as hacks and scams, NFT frauds, terrorist financing, sanctions evasion, to ensure that individuals transacting with this asset class know who they're doing business with and can avoid those risky transactions, or prevent a user from inadvertently sending money to a scam site. As I'll share here in a few minutes, you know what the largest category of illicit use of cryptocurrency is? Scams and frauds. And people fall for them every day, unfortunately. In fact, as we're entering sort of this economic distress period where inflationary pressures are on people's bank accounts and retirement savings, it can move individuals into a feeling of they've got to make up for lost time. So individuals can become more prone to a scam or inducement. And so that's important for the public to be aware of and to avoid those types of activities. So we help companies understand and manage those kinds of risks. Obviously, also, in fact, I was at a conference yesterday in which the speaker was talking about how money exploited as part of scams and romance scams was then using to fund human trafficking to send individuals from Africa into Southern Europe. Just a whole circle of abuse. Everything from stealing someone's life savings to then using that money to put someone into modern day slavery. And those kind of practices are just abominable, and we've got to do things about it. So let me share a little bit about some of the growth and impact these technologies are having and how it's accelerating around the world. So we spent a lot of time looking at the data to see how this cryptocurrencies are being used in various jurisdictions around the world and how that may be changing in various countries. And each year we produce our geography of cryptocurrency. And this is an extract from last year's report, in which we ranked all the countries of the world by a series of factors of where they're adopting cryptocurrency. For those of you in the back of the room, you may not be able to see, but see what number 1 was last year? It was Vietnam. And number 2, India and Pakistan. Now, interesting, India and Pakistan were also mentioned in a report just a few years ago by the World Bank, in which the World Bank released a study saying that approximately 31% of the world's population remains unbanked, meaning they don't have a formal relationship with a financial institution. So we have individuals in many of these countries, literally billions of our fellow inhabitants on this planet do not have formal banking relationships, which makes it very difficult for both of them to store money and to share and send money to others. And in some of these economically challenged locations, they also have great inflationary pressures. So we've seen individuals begin to move to cryptocurrency, particularly stable coins, or those cryptocurrency coins that are indexed to a stable currency, as a way to hedge against inflation and store value. I'm familiar with a colleague of mine that told me of a story of an individual who lived in South Africa, and they had relatives further north, many countries away, and they would have to cash their paychecks into cash and then pay someone to transport that cash to relatives back home, because there was no formal way to get that money there, and the costs and risks associated with that were significant. Whereas now they could use cryptocurrency as a way to do that for very, very inexpensive. So why are criminals turning to crypto? For the same reason legitimate users are. It's a low-cost, high-speed, secure way to transmit value cross-border, right? And so many of those are turning to it for that very same reason. Low-cost, high-speed, secure way to transmit value cross-border. That's what digital assets and cryptocurrency on the blockchain mean. The United States ranked 8th last year on our report, and it's interesting when you look at the top who's who in that list, you can see a lot of these emerging places where individuals are seeking financial independence and the democratization of finance. You think of how smart contracts could work to allow individuals to be able to gain access to finance. And people think, well, what is a smart contract? If you've ever used a vending machine, you've engaged in a smart contract. They offer goods and service, you put in the required amount, and if you do it the way prescribed, you get the good and service. and a smart contract can be scored to do that very same thing. All right, so let's dig in and talk a little bit about some of the crime. And again, as I mentioned, as a former law enforcement officer, my job when I walk in and I see a library full of books, lots of beautiful books, but I'm going to notice the one book that's a little out of place, right? Now, the other 999 books are exactly where they're supposed to be, but I get paid to look for the books that are out of place. That's a wonderful skill to have. Sometimes it doesn't always work out at home when you walk in and you're like, whoa, why is this left on the floor, right? When the rest of the house is in perfect order. But that's what we're paid to do, is we look for the anomalies, because somewhere underneath that anomaly is someone's life being disrupted, some victim who's being taken advantage of. And if we understand how those anomalies operate and how that money is being exploited, then we have a chance of preventing that future victimization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how illicit actors are utilizing cryptocurrency to advance their illicit and malign purposes. So, what are some of the key observations from our crime report? By the way, if you want to read this report, it's available online. You can go to our website at chainanalysis.com, click on the link and download our report, and you can read it. We put it out every year. It comes out in January, February timeframe of every year. And then off cycle, we have our geography report, and that should be out shortly. But this past report that came out just a few months ago, we found that cryptocurrency crime was at an all-time high. Not surprising, right? Can't have $15.8 trillion exchange hand last year and not have crime at an all-time high. However, we found that the relative percentage of the dollars exchanged hand were at an all-time low. Now granted, it's only what we can see and is what we can know, and there's always underreporting in crime. You ask if anybody who operates in this space, it's difficult to know all of what's happened, but we can go by what the trends are and what gets reported and what we can analyze and see. And that helps give us velocity and directional input. We also found that nation-state actors were consolidating around separate cryptocurrency strategies, and I'll get into that and peel that back a little bit. We also saw that ransomware continues to be a persistent threat, although the total economic impact of ransomware is still much lower than the frauds and scams we talked about. We'll peel that back a little bit. We also saw large amounts of criminal funds sitting in these wallets. Because the blockchain is permanent and transparent and visible, you can see the money sitting in these wallets. Now, knowing who owns and controls that, it requires additional tracing and ultimately legal process to serve against the location where they may have those funds secured. But you can see those. And we see that money laundering remains concentrated in just a few hundred deposit addresses. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In fact, I'll just say, one of the things that we were able to notice when you look at all of these wallets associated with illicit activity and you follow them to where individuals go to cash out, meaning how do I convert my stolen crypto or how I got paid for my crime in crypto, where I try to cash out and turn it back into fiat so I can buy the Lamborghini or whatever other thing this criminal wants. We found that they cash out at really a narrow number of places around the world. That's significant because that way those governments and those law enforcement institutions can go after and target those locations to shut down these criminal mills who are facilitating the cash out of that crime. It's kind of like the interstate you can't ever get off of, right? So if you want to catch the speeders, you're waiting at those exit points. And that has significance. So what does total illicit activity look like last year? Well, the stack there on the far right-hand side shows you. We identified at least $14 billion associated with illicit activity last year. And then there's striations within that stack based on the different kinds of categories we talked about earlier, whether it be malware or terrorist financing, scams, frauds, and so forth. As you can see there, scams still make up the vast majority of the identified illicit activity. There's people being scammed in the millions today, and there are going to be millions more scammed out of individuals tomorrow. And so public awareness is so important, right? And the scam and scammers are as unique and varied as is the amounts. One of the interesting things though we saw was, and these are identified illicit activity, was at an all-time low. Now certainly that number is far larger than is indicated, but its percentage was noticeably smaller. And this is something to watch. So one of the things, and I had talked to this a little bit about scamming, so this gives you a sense for how much scamming made up of the total cryptocurrency stolen during this past period. And when you look at this here, one of the new trends that we saw in here was what we call rug pulls. And what is a rug pull? So as this cryptocurrency and decentralized finance began to take hold, lots of coin offerings came out where individuals said, we're going to start our own cryptocurrency, we're going to start our own blockchain, or we're going to create our own decentralized finance network. And individuals and investors had seen how other coins had done and prospered and seen logarithmic growth in percentages, that just boggle the mind. And so many individuals said, well, I want to be a part of one of those things when it gets up and started. And that's all good and well if it's actually performing work by individuals who are reliable and trustworthy. But we've also seen fraudsters enter into that arena, promise these great returns, say we're going to do a coin offering. They gather money from initial investors, and then they pull the rug and disappear with all those funds, right? And so unfortunately, we've seen these kinds of scams take advantage. And I would just add a word of caution here, especially as people feel financial pressure, they sometimes begin to let their guard down. It almost kind of like works in reverse psychology. If you're under a lot of financial pressure, that's the time to be even more careful and conservative. And yet human nature sometimes goes in the opposite direction because they feel vulnerable, they feel frustrated, and they're looking for some kind of way to leapfrog out of that problem. I mean, in the old days, you hear the individual who is in financial trouble, so what do? They go gambling, right, to try to make up those gains quickly. And what do they find themselves? By the time they're done, they're deeper in the hole than they were when they began, and the desperation is more profound, right? So something to watch where 2022 and 2023 may go with these kinds of operations like rug pulls and scams. I suspect, unfortunately, they will continue to plague many individuals. So we follow this kind of data to watch what those trends are and then identify those best practices that individuals and governments and corporations can do to try to protect their members and protect their citizens. We're also looking at the total number of active investment scams. Obviously, they have increased. I'll be curious to see what that number looks like for this year, right, as more and more people become aware of. I mean, how many years ago we would have never had a speech here about cryptocurrency, right? It just wasn't a thing. Well, it is a thing, and more people are aware of it. And as more people become aware of this industry, the probabilities that additional victims can be found, right, was there. I was just having a conversation with an individual before I came up here about elderly individuals that we know no longer write checks. They're using Venmo and other methods to transfer money with each other. And I realized when I started seeing that the world is changing. It isn't just 21-year-old college students who are using digital assets to transfer value. It's people across all the spectrum because it's a low-cost, high-speed, secure way to transfer value globally. That's very, very appealing. And it should be. It's democratizing access to finance. That's a good thing when managed properly. So here's something interesting to take note of, though. And we also look at these scams in their lifespan, right? So again, here we're in the science building and we talk about half-lives, right? The half-life of a scam is continuing to drop and drop significantly. What does that mean? So let's say I'm a scammer, I'm a fraudster, and I want to start this scam. And I get out there and I start scamming people and taking money using my spiel, and I'm gathering in the money. Well, the trick is, how long do you stay on stage before the authorities start to notice you? You better get off stage and move on to your next scam, because if you stay there too long, you're going to get hit by a train. Well, these scammers realize that, and so they have moved and are pivoting far quicker. It also means that law enforcement pressure and that ability to detect and report is probably getting better as well. So it's narrowing the half-life of these scams. I mean, I'm sure this can go lower, but we're seeing the half-lives of these scams go very quickly. So what's the take-home message? We've got to move quicker. We've got to raise the level of crypto literacy. We've got to empower the authorities and the public to be aware of these tools and capabilities, because the longer you delay, time is not your friend. This money is going to move, and it's going to move quickly. And if you don't go after it, the odds of being able to recover it are slim. I was talking with someone yesterday, and they were citing about an instance where an individual had been scammed out of like $10,000. And $10,000 is a lot of money to an individual. But in the grand scheme of things, of $15.8 trillion, it's not as much. This person reported it, but as they began to pull the digital threads associated with that crypto scam, they found out that there were lots and lots and lots of other people who had been scammed $10,000. And when you add all of those up, it becomes millions and millions of dollars. So the timely reporting of these types of events are really important for identifying those actors and shutting them down, and hopefully recovering those resources. I don't think I have a slide on it, but I'll mention, I think since January of 2021, authorities around the world have recovered over $10 billion in crypto. 10 billion, that's a lot of money. Most recently, last year, I think the IRS recovered over $3.5 billion in crypto alone as part of their seizure recoveries. That's a significant amount of money. So that tells you that money is moving in that, and as we raise the level of crypto literacy, we have a chance of recovering these funds for these victims. Something that isn't always possible with traditional fiat, especially when it gets turned into cash or wired to a jurisdiction on the other side of the world and the paper trail goes cold. The blockchain paper trail doesn't go cold. It's there in perpetuity. So even if you don't know who committed the fraud today, that blockchain record is going to be there 6 years from now, 10 years from now. All right, one of the other interesting things is this darknet market revenue by various categories. And drugs, of course, make up the largest portion of darknet markets. For those of you who don't know, a darknet market is I can go on to the dark web and say I want to buy and purchase illicit services, the vast majority of which are narcotics, and you can literally have it delivered to your house. And so individuals will make those purchases and they'll be paid for by cryptocurrency. Unfortunately for many of these bad actors is they're leaving permanent records of those transactions to be found and discovered later. Not smart, but they're doing it anyway because they want to buy those goods and services. So darknet markets, in particular of narcotics, make up a disproportional amount of the darknet market revenue identified. And there are some fraud shops as well. So interesting, as you're doing cryptocurrency tracing, you can see money coming out of that darknet market location and going into this crypto wallet, and then that crypto wallet moving this money over to this institution to cash it out. So you've got that pedigree of that fraud trail, something that's just simply not possible with traditional finance, much less cash. One of the other things we can look at and we spend time is on identifying criminal whales and what they do with their money. Now, a criminal whale is someone who has at least $1 million associated with illicit activity. And there are a lot of these individuals. And so we look at where do they move and park their money. Remember what I said at the beginning, that 2/3 of all Bitcoin is on exchanges? Well, they're no different. Because at the end of the day, if you can't convert the crypto into something you can spend, it's just ether, right? It's just digital. So we can do that, and there's an example of the kind of tracing that individuals who use our tools and data are able to follow. We also look at how the ecosystem is adapting. Decentralized finance, again, that offers that promise of democratizing access to finance, that ability to move money, but it's also attracting the criminals because they can now steal on a scale that Willie Sutton couldn't even imagine, right? Go in the front door of the bank, come out with 5,000, go into the back door of the bank through a digital connection and take hundreds of millions. Just simply was not possible. It is now. We also look at where criminals will use to off-ramp their funds, and we break that out both by category and the types of locations. It does vary by crime type, right? So, but we do see some uniformity and consistency with those. And that's of value. That kind of criminal intelligence is both helpful for your bank, for example, to help understand and manage risk associated with protecting your assets, and the cryptocurrency exchanges to be sure. Now let's pivot a little bit to talk about ransomware. So what is ransomware? You've probably heard about ransomware in the news. If you live here on the East Coast, you definitely felt the impact of ransomware last year. But it also is silently impacting all of us, regardless of where you live, because it's raising the cost of doing business. So what is a ransomware campaign? So a criminal or hacker breaks into a network of, whether it be a utility company, a hospital, a business, and they go in, they identify the data of interest to that company, and they encrypt it and lock it up, right? I mean, what company can operate today without access to their data and their information systems? I mean, information is the currency of the 21st century, and data is at its core. So these hackers realize that, so they go for the crown jewels, and they break in and they lock up the data. Then they send an extortion note back to the company saying, hey, if you want access to your data again, pay us, and we'll release it. They do this to colleges, to institutions, hospitals. Even during the peak of the pandemic, we had individuals extorting ransoms from healthcare systems while people are suffering in hospitals, right? It's just no heart, right? But they don't care, again, because why do they do it? They want money. And so ransomware has been and continues to be a serious problem. But also, we saw it happen with utility providers. When gas pipelines start shutting down and you can't get access, or your air conditioner goes off because the power company's offline, or you can't get fuel for your vehicles, and now essential supplies can't be moved, that starts to impact lots of folks. We've looked at how that changes over time, and you can see it sort of oscillates and comes and goes, but the overall upwards trend is certainly going up. And we looked at the amount of money received by ransomware actors over time. Again, that's definitely a hockey stick growth. And the two charts, you've got both red and blue. Red being the amount of money received in the first half of the year, and the amount of money received in the second half of the year. And because there's always a data echo, meaning we don't really know what happened last year until later into the following year, right? Because there's always that data echo in reporting. It's important to watch what the data shows happening in the first part of the year, because that gives you a sense for the velocity and trend. When I show you this graph this time next year, that data is going to be even higher, because we'll have more data fidelity and more time to aggregate reporting. And that's also a significant problem with ransomware, because who wants to really go out there and tell the whole world, hey, somebody broke into our system and locked up all our data? Yeah, it's not really good, right? Who wants to go and admit that? So there's always that natural hesitancy to underreport. And they have individuals who will just pay those individuals, get their data unlocked, they hope, and they try to get back in business. And ransomware actors have moved on from just locking up your data and extorting it to unlock it. They now steal that data and then they sell it. So now they get a twofer. They get the money you pay them to unlock it, and they get money to sell that personally privacy information on the dark web to people who want to buy it to scam credit cards and everything else. So they get paid twice. And then sometimes, if you don't pay them fast enough, they demand a bonus tip. So they then get paid 3 times. And real problem. One of the things interesting here is you can see the active ransomware campaigns in the upper left-hand corner. That's just going up. The lifespan of a ransomware strain going down, similar to what we saw in scams. In other words, they're moving on to the next campaign. But here's something fascinating to be aware of. How are these ransomware actors being paid? They're being paid in crypto. Why is that a good thing for those seeking to thwart ransomware? Because they are leaving indelible, permanent records of the wallets and transactions they're used to being paid. In addition, if I'm going to conduct a ransomware campaign, guess what I need to do to get ready? Well, I need to go out there and find me an illicit cloud provider who will be willing to park where I can park all that stolen data to. And how am I going to pay that illicit cloud provider? I'm going to pay them in crypto. And then when I need to go get the tooling that I need to hack and break into this network and buy it from an administrator, how am I going to purchase that hacking and malware? I'm going to purchase it with crypto. And then when I do, and I steal whatever I steal, or ransom whatever I ransom, I've got to pay that administrator and give them a cut, maybe as much as 20%. And how am I going to pay them? I'm going to pay them with crypto. So what are these actors doing? They are mapping their criminal network through the use of cryptocurrency. And so now authorities and those seeking to protect these victims, they've got that mapped out network of who they buy it from, when they buy it, what they buy it, and what they do with it. And now something that gives great insight that's just not always able in other types of crimes. So why do these ransomware actors rebrand and try to change and move up? Well, obviously they want to evade sanctions because they know the banks and the institutions who are trying to screen for these bad actors are trying to update their systems. So if they can come in looking like somebody else, then hopefully they can evade that detection. And it allows them to do a soft rebrand where they change just a little bit to look a little different. But if they're still continuing to use some of those same cryptocurrency infrastructures and wallets, we can relink them and say, no, I don't care what they're calling themselves, they're still these people. What we saw that 56% of the funds sent from ransomware addresses ended up at one of 6 cryptocurrency businesses. This is a significant statistic. So think about all the ransomware campaigns going on across the world. where you have over half of all of the ransomware campaigns ended up back at 6 services. That's significant. So that bespeaks an infrastructure or a network of cashing out. That's important. That's an interesting clue. All right, let's pivot here in our last little bit and talk about criminal balances. At the end of 2021, we were able to identify approximately $11 billion sitting in criminal balances around the world. Why is that significant? Because that means money that, with sufficient probable cause to establish that it was derived from illicit activity, it's eligible for potential seizure and recovery for victims. We also looked at how those balances change over time, and they ebb and flow as people attempt to cash out. We also look at criminal whales. These are these individuals that have more than $1 million in cryptocurrency with at least 10% exposure to illicit activity and where they're storing their money. These are these large networks of individuals. If you run a gang and you've got all your street actors out there selling drugs for you, but then they bring all the money back and you put that in one place, right? So that's kind of what the digital equivalent of what's happening here. We also can look to see where maybe some of those whales concentrate and kind of see where they align up. And here's an interesting graph that shows where they align up by UTC. We can also look at what that sending and receiving exposure might look like. In other words, where are they getting the money from and where are they sending the money to? And by the kind of data that we collect, that helps us understand that. On money laundering, again, the same kind of thing where we see how that cryptocurrency funds are being laundered. The real trick in money laundering is, how do I make the money look like it isn't what it is, right? And sometimes in the old world, you'd have to pass that through a series of shell corporations, or maybe you run it as cash proceeds in a cash-based type business, a laundromat or a restaurant, or whatever kind of a business front that you're working, right? But then when you look at it like, whoa, you got to be washing a lot of clothes to make that kind of money. Well, the same kind of thing has to happen in the digital world. And so where are they moving that money through to try to launder it so that it doesn't look like it's proceeds from a scam? Well, unfortunately for them, in the digital assets world, because it's the blockchain, an investigator with the right data and tools can look to see where that money came from and follow that pedigree backwards, and then look at all the wallets that contributed to those funds. And that's why you're seeing these increasingly larger amounts of seizures in these cases that authorities around the world are making, because they're becoming crypto literate and quite sophisticated at being able to try to protect these victims and shut this down. But of course, they've got the counter pressure of more money moving into that space, more actors moving into that space, legitimate and illegitimate. All right, let me wrap up here with just talking briefly about some of the malign actor threats that we see associated with cryptocurrency. I spent most of this time talking about criminals and how they're leveraging that to steal and scam money. But we also see nation-state actors utilizing cryptocurrencies. And I won't go into a lot of detail given the setting, but let me just speak at a high level about a number of things. So we're seeing cryptocurrency being utilized for a whole host and range of criminal activity, ranging from money laundering and scams, as we talked about, to other things like narcotics, child exploitation, and terrorism, both international and domestic. Think of the ability to fundraise. There's a famous news story back quite a number of years ago where a young college student at a football game, I believe it was, held up a QR code, right, and said, donate. And that person got a ton of Bitcoin, right, was donated to them, because all those little fractions add up, right? And so think about that for online fundraising, both for good and for bad. Imagine if you're running a terrorist organization and you're using that as a way for individuals who support your cause to donate and send money to you. Wow, you don't have to go and move money across borders and try to hide it in the trunk of your car. It can just be done electronically. Again, why are criminals turning to crypto? Because it's a low-cost, high-speed, secure way to send money trans-border. All the reasons the legitimate actors want to use it. So we see individuals and nation states leveraging crypto for a host and variety of reasons. Everything from great powers competition with countries like China and Russia to rogue actors like Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, as well as asymmetric threats coming from these transnational criminal organized groups, like the one I was talking about earlier, who uses frauds and scams, romance scams, for example, to steal millions of dollars from individuals around the world and then funnel that back into human trafficking, sending sex workers into Southern Europe. Just awful. And get that money so that they can take the money that they stole and make even more and ruin the lives of even larger numbers of people. So what are we seeing malign actors do in nation states' use of crypto? Well, it has the potential to become that 21st century Hawaladar where illicit raising of funds for these groups could happen. We see the potential to crowdsource terrorism. We saw, for example, China's launch of a digital yuan, right, as their digital currency offering. Prior to May of 2021, China-based miners controlled the majority of Bitcoin's global hash rate. An interesting statistic and something to be aware of. Ransomware attacks are prolific and significant, and a majority of them have been identified as coming out of places like Russia and other Commonwealth independent states. North Korea hackers stole over $1.5 billion worth of crypto in exchange hacks, and they are able to use that to fund their illicit activities and evade sanctions. Or places like Iran. One of the things that I would note is insider threat programs are identifying individuals. Individuals in work in certain government organizations and to clear backgrounds have to do financial disclosures. Well, crypto needs to be made a part of those financial disclosure programs to identify the potential risks and assets individuals might have. I have a whole series of other slides that I could go through on individual nation-state actors, but I think I will wrap up and pause here so that we can leave time for questions both in the room and online. And if maybe some of that content's relevant, I can resurrect it and bring it back. We get this question a lot about, well, what about the issues of things going on in Ukraine? And could we see Russian and other sanctioned individuals using cryptocurrency as a way to evade sanctions? We get that question from time to time. And what I can tell you was that as of right now, we have not seen any unusual activity in Russia or Ukraine at the macro level, meaning large amounts of money being utilized to evade sanctions. And as with the traditional financial system, it would be difficult for Russia-based actors to evade sanctions. It would be very difficult for them to do that undetected at scale. Some individuals said, well, yes, but what about mixing services where they bring their crypto in through one door and it goes out the other and it makes it difficult to see? Kind of like 100 people go into a room, they all change clothes with each other and walk out dressed differently, right? And it'd be very difficult to visually track who is who. The reality is there's a liquidity issue there. It's difficult to do that at scale, on the kind of scale that we're talking about. Can it happen on small amounts? Sure, it's possible. Very difficult for a large nation state and large actors to do that at scale. And if they did, because of the transparency of crypto, it would be easier to identify that. What are those key takeaways? Again, the vast majority of cryptocurrency is for lawful and legitimate purposes, but you can't have trillions of dollars move into a new asset class and not attract criminals and grifters. It's important that we raise the level of our crypto literacy both as individuals and citizens, but also as those in the care about cybersecurity and national security and law enforcement, because the criminals, like Willie Sutton, go where the money is. And 21st century finance is moving into digital assets and cryptocurrency. What will that look like in 5 years? Will your mortgage one day be on the blockchain? It's very possible, right? And that means the amount of money we're talking about now of cryptocurrency will pale in comparison to the kind of money that can move into the blockchain. That could open up whole new avenues of finance for the underprivileged and for individuals to lower the cost to both store value and transfer, but it's also going to attract individuals who will seek to take advantage of their fellow man. And we need to be prepared, and one of the best ways to do it is to become educated, which is one of the reasons why I was so excited when I was given this opportunity to come here, because I just have a deep and abiding passion for learning and that curiosity to be around others who also want to do that. So I'd invite you to raise your level of crypto literacy, learn about it. If this is a space you're interested in, there are wonderful opportunities for individuals both at the coding level as well as the practical and operations. And be glad to entertain any questions you might have. And here are some additional resources if you'd like to, and I'll make these links available if you want. But you can go to our website and there are quite a number of those that you can learn a little bit more about these topics.